The title of my talk is in Spanish in the program, but unfortunately, I don't speak Spanish, so I'm going to speak in English. I want to thank Octavio for inviting me to the conference. I wish to congratulate him and Doris and all the members of your center for reaching this important milestone that this conference commemorates. To my knowledge, there is no comparable group with a longer or more distinguished history of research and development focused on understanding digital technologies and how they can positively transform teaching, learning, and literacy. The many projects your center has sponsored across 20 years are grounded in theory and research. But more importantly, they've enhanced educational practice in Columbia's schools. It's an honor to be invited and to participate in marking your success and important accomplishments. I want to thank you too for inviting me to return a third time to Columbia in relation to your work in the center. Each visit, I appreciate more the beauty, the cultural charms, and the welcoming spirit of the Colombian people. The remarkable social, political, and economic advancements that have occurred during the previous 20 years are inspirational to other nations and testify to a national resilience and commitment to addressing difficult problems. I wish some of our elected officials in my own country would take some of that cooperative spirit and apply it to our problems. The transformation that has occurred is particularly evident here in Medellin, under leaders such as Sergio Fajardo, a visionary willing to apply his scholarly intellect to social and political problems. The movement, inspired by his leadership, recognizes the importance of education and literacy in advancing human dignity and in laying a foundation for reform and civility. The beautiful Parque Biblioteca in Medellin are visual symbols of how education and literacy are intimately connected to moving society from fear to hope. I hope too that I have made a small but personally meaningful contribution to your center's success. For example, it was my pleasure to host 3 of your doctoral students at my university for a semester 7 years ago, all 3 of whom have gone on to work in your center. In fact, I know 2 of them are here. Dora and Wilson. And these are some pictures of Dora. Is Nora here? These are some pictures taken at my university when they were visiting several years ago. I'm sure that you'll agree that our mentoring of doctoral students is how to pass on the legacy of those who mentored us. And in that same spirit, I've brought along one of my doctoral students, Emily Howell, who will be helping me if I have technological problems, but also will be sharing with you some of her experiences as a high school English teacher using technologies in the United States as part of the second part of my talk tomorrow. I also want to thank my friend and colleague Clementina Adams, who is a professor of Spanish language and culture at my university. She was born in, and I'm going to try to pronounce this city, Barranquilla. She also spent many years in Bogota, and she's been a good friend and colleague of mine, and she helped me translate some of my slides. Although if there are mistakes, it's because I mistyped them or copied them incorrectly. So our talk has 2 parts, today and tomorrow, addressing a unifying question. How can theory, research, and innovative practice help us align the increasingly dominant digital forms of reading and writing outside of school with our efforts to develop literacy inside of school? And the last question or 2 fit very nicely with that theme. It was a good segue into what we are going to address. Theory gives us foundational understandings of the differences between printed and digital text. Research helps us understand the challenges and obstacles that inhibit this alignment. And innovative practice can test our theories and research findings in authentic contexts and suggest avenues for better alignment. To start our journey, we identify 3 underlying conditions that establish the importance of this alignment. And you will, I think, hear and see many of the same themes that you've already heard by speakers this morning. First, the first condition, increasingly all forms of information and communication no longer exist in a material form. The world of atoms, as Nicholas Negroponte argued a number of years ago, and he was the founder of the Digital Lab at MIT and was mentioned in Octavio's talk this morning. The world of atoms is being converted to configurations of electronic strings of ones and zeros. And his prediction is increasingly, I think, being realized that anything that can be digitized today will be digitized. And this condition is a worldwide condition. As these pictures show, in many areas, even remote areas of the world, we are experiencing digitization. There are data, this graph shows that the prediction is by 2015, 60% of the people in the world will be connected to the internet. The lower line on this graph reflects the least developed countries. All of these trend lines are increasing. Think of all the areas of our lives that are now digital. In our cars, we have GPS systems. We take pictures with our cell phone at rock concerts. Museums have guides that now can be accessed through your cell phone. Even a restaurant in New York Airport, where I was recently, now has digital menus. For better or worse, you don't interact with a waitress. You just type in what you want, and the food appears on your table. There are even wristbands that track our daily lives, something called Fitbit, that you can enter in the food that you eat. It will track the calories that you have eaten on a particular day, how many steps you've taken, calculates all these pieces of information about our daily health lives. And another trend in digitization is that fewer devices are being used for more things. The cell phone that I have on my belt and that many of you have in your purse or carry with you take pictures. There are GPS, a calculator. I used it to wake. It was an alarm clock that I used to wake me up this morning so I'd be here on time. They are an archive of music. They play movies. All of these devices are being shrunken into fewer and fewer devices. The tablet is the latest all-purpose device, and I think it's an appropriate name because in some ways it's the tablet on which we write our lives in many respects today. Yet these devices are evolving even further to merge the material and our raw perceptual lives with digital representations. Many of you I have not experienced this, I don't know if any of you have, but Google has come out with new Google Glass, which are eyeglasses that allow you to be continually connected to the internet, further blurring the boundaries between what is materially and perceptually real and what is digital. Being digitized may ultimately result in a new reality. And there's a sort of a dark side to this digitizing of the world, as our lives are increasingly written as digital artifacts. What was once our private life becomes a readily available public record. The sum total of our digital activities, intentionally or unintentionally, are becoming public markers that are available to anyone who might be interested. Today, even in many countries of the world, like the United States, the threat to national security is increasingly seen in terms of cybersecurity, and you see here in this graph the increasing expenditures on protecting our nation from cyber attacks. The second condition is one aspect of the first condition, and you've heard it many times already this morning. Digital text and information are replacing print. Beginning in the early 1990s, it became clear that we are moving from a typographic world dominated by paper and print toward a post-typographic digital world. As the late scholar Alan Purvis argued, he believed that this shift was revolutionary and had only two precedents in the history of writing. We saw the video this morning on some of the historical developments in writing. The first two revolutions and their effects were realized slowly across many decades and centuries. That is the invention of the alphabet and the material of papyrus. The second revolution being the printing press and paper. And the third being the invention of the digital computer. Unlike those two previous revolutions, the digital revolution has been rapid, coinciding mainly with the 20 years of the center we're here to commemorate today. The rapid evolution of digital technologies in the realm of information and communication can be seen in the next slide. I don't expect you to be able to read all of this, but this was someone's plotting of all of the developments in many different areas since the year 2000. Almost every week, every month, some new form of communication, new way of communicating and storing information or communicating appears. So while those previous revolutions were realized over decades and even centuries, this third revolution is being realized almost on a daily basis. The signs of the revolution are everywhere. We've heard already about the decline in Ilana's talk about the decline in newspapers. These graphs plot the top graph plots the precipitous decline in revenue from advertising on newspapers. The bottom graph shows the red bars are the increasing amount of advertising dollars being spent for Google. The last bar is a little shorter because it's only half of 2012. The reason for that drop is that in all age categories, and these lines on this graph represent different age levels, this is a declining trend in the people who report reading a newspaper, a conventional printed newspaper, the previous day. Likewise, Gallup polls, and I know this will be disappointing to Octavio because of his comments this morning, fewer and fewer people are reading conventional books. The Gallup poll in the U.S. has tracked how many books people read on average for many years. And today I can't read what the percentage is. What is the percentage? 19% currently. People report that they have not read a book in the past year, where in 1978, I think it was 8%. Likewise, this graph compares the total sales of printed audiobooks in the light blue line and e-books in the dark blue line. And projections are that by 2017, these lines will converge and electronic book sales will exceed printed book sales. In fact, it was several years ago, I think 2 or 3 years ago, that Amazon reported that their sales, there were more sales of electronic books than printed books. Now, paralleling these trends is the increasing popularity of e-readers. This shows just over a 2-year span the increase in the use of e-readers and tablets. The gray line being those who report having one or the other over a period of about 2.5 years. Social networking has been mentioned. The increase has been phenomenal in the use. Again, these lines refer to various age groups. One of the most prominent developments is this rise of social networks such as Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and hundreds of other sites I didn't realize there was one from Brazil, and other parts of the world certainly have their own social networks. The graph shows the dramatic increase in the use of such sites in the U.S. between 2005 and 2013, including among older Americans, and this is true in the U.S., sometimes to the regret and embarrassment of their teenage children who find that their parents now are using the young people's medium for communication. I think I read where Twitter has 2 billion accounts worldwide. Finally, this graph shows data that are actually 6 years old. And a poll was taken where people were asked where they go for information when they have a problem. And the overwhelming response, the highest bar, this was 6 years ago, was the internet. The next to the smallest graph was a library. We are very much in a time when the internet is our primary source of information. Okay, the third condition, literacy instruction in schools remain grounded in paper and print. It's most relevant to our topic of our talk. Despite these trends, literacy instruction in schools remains grounded in print. When entering many schools today, the typographic era of paper, books, and pencils moves to the foreground, while the emerging digital post-typographic era recedes to the background. That is not to say that you cannot see digital technologies in many schools today, but these technologies are often used in service of goals and activities firmly grounded in a typographic, not a post-typographic era. There's a statement by the International Reading Association that speaks to this issue of aligning digital literacies in school and out of school. To become fully literate today, students must become proficient in the new literacies of the 21st century technology. Literacy educators have a responsibility to effectively integrate these new technologies into the curriculum, preparing students for the literacy future they deserve. Another organization, National Council of Teachers of English, has several position statements, some guidelines, 11 resolutions, all pertaining to this issue. So the professional organizations, and these are they're based in the US, but these are international organizations, take the stand that this is an issue. Here I'm going to speak a little more about this third condition. I want to talk a little bit about some research that I've done with my colleague now and former student, Amy Hutchison, that sort of validates and adds some details to this state of affairs. We conducted a national survey of literacy teachers in the U.S. to determine how they are using digital technologies in their teaching and their perceptions about integrating digital technology into their instruction. Some of the relevant findings are on the next slide. The first one is quite simple. Of 100 teachers, only 16, for every 100 teachers, only 16 said that they were using digital technologies in their classroom almost every day. The next slide reveals a couple interesting things, but I need to explain the slide a little bit. Teachers were asked to report the frequency that they used various technologies, and then they were also asked to indicate how important those technologies were. And the scale for both of those items was from 0 to 4, which you see on the bottom. 0 means I don't use it at all. I don't think it's important at all. 4 means I use it a lot, and I think it's very important. The red line refers to how important the teachers ranked each of these various, and this is only a small part of a long list. The blue indicates how much they were actually using it. And one thing that's interesting is that in every case, teachers ranked the importance greater than their frequency of use. So teachers want to integrate technology at a level greater than they are actually using it. The other thing that this reveals is we pulled out the top three in the yellow box, using reference sites online, locating information online, creating a Word document. And these were kind of grouped in more conventional applications of technology, just using the technology to do what they've always do. We call this technical integration. The focus was on just using the technologies. And you can see that the lines, the red line, the blue line, are both longer in that part. The green box, collaborating online with students from other classes, publishing information on a wiki or blog, synthesizing information online. These are what we call more curricular integration. You have to change what you're doing in some important way. And you can see the lines in that portion of the graph are shorter. I hope that's clear. So this leads us to what we consider a very important and provocative question. Is a failure to acknowledge and address digital literacy in schools, complete disregard for what's going on outside of school, could that be considered malpractice? And that's a strong word. But are we at a point where teachers who do not acknowledge and change to adapt to these new forms of literacy, are they committing malpractice? There are several questions now that I would like to pursue in the rest of the talk. One is, how can we, these are questions that guide us in considering this topic. How can we align literacy instruction inside and out of school, given the rapidly evolving digital technologies and forms? Things are changing so fast. How can we keep up? What skills, what strategies, dispositions should be retained that we've already been doing, replaced, expanded, transformed, or extended? What are keys to successful transformation? How do we do that and do it efficiently and well? And what are the obstacles that we need to overcome in classrooms to make that happen? And finally, what will digital literacy be in the future? Can we anticipate and prepare students for that future when we don't know exactly what it's going to be? This is where the title of our talk comes into play. We cannot answer all these questions in the remainder of this talk, and today or tomorrow, but we hope to illustrate how theory, research, and practice provide some guidance and insights. Note the arrows on this slide. It reflects our firm belief that these three avenues for understanding are interdependent, forming an inseparable triad. So although we will approach them somewhat separately in our talk, we will also try to show you how activity in one domain can enrich activity in the other two. So first, a few theoretical assumptions that we make. And this will pick up on some themes that have already been mentioned today. Each of the three revolutions in reading and writing cited by Purvis in the previous slide involved the introduction of new technologies. We make the assumption that all reading and writing require technologies. And it took time for people to become familiar with them, to become adept at using them, and to discover how they might be used. And I'm going to try, at this point, to play a YouTube video. And we'll see if it works, all right? Because this video is, in a humorous way, illustrates this.
Broder Ansgar?
Ja,
Det er deg, ja.
ja.
Så bra, ok.
Ja, hei du. Hei du. Ja.
Ja, hva gjelder det?
Ja, det er denne her. Ja, vil du sitte?
Takk.
Ja.
Jaha.
Ja, så jeg har ikke fått gjort noen ting hele formiddagen.
Ok, nei, jeg beklager at det tar tid. Altså, skjønner vi holder på å legge om til et helt nytt system, og da skal alle ha hjelp på en gang. Vet du.
Ja.
Så du kommer ikke inn i den, eller?
Nei, den bare ligger der.
Ok, har du forsøkt å åpne den?
Ja, åpne den, altså hvis det hadde vært så enkelt, så hadde jeg jo ikke tilkalt helpdesk, hadde jeg vel?
Nei, det er
Nei.
sant.
Nei. Vil du ha en kopp varmt vann?
Nei, da, det skal være fort gjort. Det
Ja.
skal vi se. Du bare gjør der. Sånn.
Ja.
Da er du i gang.
Ja, altså så langt kom jeg også.
Ok.
Ikke sant? Men så stoppet det opp, og så var jeg redd for at noe av teksten skulle forsvinne, så jeg turte ikke å gå videre.
Åja, ok. Nei, men du skjønner at inni her, så ligger det kanskje flere hundre sider med lagret tekst. Så for å komme videre, så tar du tak i et ark på den måten her, og så liksom blar du over på neste side sånn. Da fortsetter teksten der.
Jeg blar, altså.
Du blar, ja.
Men når jeg skal tilbake, da?
Ja, da bare blar du tilbake igjen. Tar tak der, og så gjør du sånn. Der. Så er du tilbake til den teksten du hadde sa. Ikke noe
Ok, så den
forandret.
slutter der,
Ja.
og så fortsetter den der, ja. Ok, men når jeg skal avslutte for dagen, hva gjør jeg da?
Da bare slår du sammen permene
Ja?
på den måten der. Sånn. Da er den lukket, da ligger alt lagret inni der.
Altså, jeg risikerer ikke å miste noe av teksten her nå,
Nei,
altså.
alt ligger lagret inni her nå.
Ja.
Da må du i tilfelle sette fyr på hele greia. Det er kanskje lite sannsynlig. Så.
Ja, ok. Nei, men for det er noe med det at liksom, når du har holdt på med skriftruller,
Ja.
så tar det litt grann tid å konvertere til å bla i en bøk. Ja. Ja, av og til litt.
Det var greit.
Ja, flott. Ja, men du, en til før du går. Jeg må bare gå gjennom en gang til. Altså, jeg åpner
Ja.
sånn,
Ja, riktig.
og så, hva har du kalt det?
Blar.
Jeg blar,
Ja, blar videre.
blar frem og tilbake.
Ja.
Og når,
Teksten ligger der hele tiden.
ja. Og når jeg er ferdig, så bare lukker jeg den.
Oi.
Flott. Kjempefint.
Ja, flott det.
Ja, men du, vent, ikke sant? Nå er den sånn igjen, nå får jeg ikke åpnet den. Nå får jeg ikke åpnet den.
Ja, det er fra feil side. Du må åpne fra andre siden.
Så det er ikke likegyldig, det,
Nei,
altså?
du må åpne fra den siden der. Sånn. Der. Der er den åpen.
Ja vel.
Har du
Ok.
lest manualen, eller?
Manualen?
Jeg skal følge med som manual og så brukerveiledning. Det er sikkert den der. Der, vet du.
Å ja,
I
den,
der
ja.
står alt sammen.
Ja, men ikke sant, der har du samme problemet. Får den ikke opp. Få åpnet den.
Ok, det skulle vi kanskje ha tenkt på.
In case you were wondering, that is not English that they were speaking. It was Norwegian or Danish or something. A second assumption that is that technology and sociology interact, and this relates to Alana's point. We could frame this as technological determinism versus the social factors. And our position is very much the same as Alana mentioned. The technologies for reading and writing set boundaries for what is possible, but sociology determines how people use the tools for reading and writing within those boundaries. The picture on the right of the screen is a favorite of mine that sort of illustrates this idea. You may wonder what is going on in that picture on the right side of the screen. This is a picture of a rabbi from the United States who went to the Wailing Wall in Jerusalem, where typically it's very important to say prayers. But his friend could not accompany him on the trip. So he called his friend on the cell phone and held the cell phone at the wall so that his friend could also say a prayer. Now, this is a very interesting example of the blend between what technologies permit and what sociology dictates. Bruno Latour, a French sociologist, had a very clever way of saying this. He said that technology is society made durable. We practice our social lives through technology and manage those lives through our technologies. So we must understand that technology is available for reading and writing. We also remember that sociology is often more important in shaping reading and writing. The interesting thing here, and I think this is an important point, is that the technologies, the new technologies for reading and writing are so powerful, so open-ended, that we can, the sociology takes over. We can decide what we want. We don't have to be prisoners to the technology. We can decide what we want, what we value, and the technology will allow us to do that. Here's another assumption that technologies have affordances that shape reading and writing. And a good example, I think, is the scroll. For example, the technological affordances of scrolls made long text convenient to store and thus inspired the writing of longer texts. Yet scrolls were cumbersome to rewind, making it difficult to review a previous portion of a text. Thus, writers were redundant, repeating relevant ideas and information from earlier portions of the text because they knew how difficult it was to go back to an earlier portions. Scrolls and later the Codex book had technological affordances that demanded linear and arguments and chronologically presented information. So what are the affordances of the book? The affordance of a book encourage, if not demand, hierarchical linear organization and arguments represented by outlines and tables of contents and an index which serves as an aid to nonlinear navigation. But the natural affordances of the technology of the book create linear hierarchical arguments. So what are the affordances of digital text? Another way to ask this question is asking how printed and digital text differ. And what follows is a brief overview of noteworthy affordances of digital text in relation to printed text, what the implications of those affordances might be for instruction, and how they connect with a few sociological instincts that seem to transcend cultural and historical boundaries. The first one has been already referred to, the fact that digital texts are naturally intertextual and nonlinear. They exist naturally as hypertext. They erase the boundaries between where one text ends and another begins. Theoretically, all texts can be connected with others through associational networks. Digital texts invite associational rather than linear hierarchical thinking and arguments. Even more conventional texts, such as Wikipedia entry, which you see on the screen here, is not purely hierarchical and linear, although it tries to be. The words and phrases that are in blue, which is a convention we've adopted on the internet, refer to a link. And if you're like me, when you go to Wikipedia, you don't read the article from beginning to end. Somewhere you click on one of those links and oftentimes being distracted. The implications for reading and writing are profound. How do we help students contend with and write hypertext? Is something lost in the bargain? This relates to one of those basic instincts I referred to. This intertextual linking of texts seem to be a basic instinct that cuts across technologies of reading and writing and various cultures and historical periods. And if you look at this graphic on the screen, you might wonder what's going on. This is a 16th century woodcut of a scholar, presumably a scholar in an ancient library, where someone has opened many books to the passage that the scholar is interested in, and then put them on a wheel that is rotated so that the scholar can easily move from one text to another. So there seems to be this human need to connect things across texts. Another affordance of digital text is that they have a rhetoric that is dynamically visual and multimodal. Graphical representations claim equal or superior footing in digital text. In printed text, graphical information is subservient to prose written as alphanumeric text. This PowerPoint is an example. I wrote this talk starting from the slides. I had some ideas in my head, I found some pictures, and the text developed around the slides, which is much different than people who organized talks 20 years ago before we had PowerPoint. Richard Lanham, a rhetorician who has written a lot about digital text, stated this in a poetic sense, and I hope this translates. Well, it is translated on the screen. He said, "Printed text is the crystal goblet that contains the wine of meaning. We look through the visual representation of a conventional printed text, whereas maybe the better metaphor for digital text is the multi-sensory carnival funhouse. We've got so many more things that we can do visually, and the visual rhetoric is as important, if not more important, than the printed text that we looked at. Instructionally, we have to ask how we teach students to read and write in this multi-sensory mode. Are there rhetorical principles for writing such text that might be taught? What are they? Is it our responsibility to help our students become what we might call graphical designers of web pages and PowerPoints? Is that part of our mission as teachers and educators in this new digital world? Another affordance is that digital texts are literally interactive. In this scheme, in a printed book, the book has been sort of something that's been frozen in time. The author wrote it, the publisher published it, and it just sits there. It's up to the reader to make sense of that text. Digital text, on the other hand, can be more of an interactive experience between what Roland Barthes has argued is becoming a writerly text. By selecting a path through a text, we become writers of that text. Another former student and now colleague, John McEnany, wrote an article about this, what he called agent-based literacy theory. And a quote that gives you the flavor of that, of his point and his perspective is, in the digital world, texts become readers and readers become texts. The texts are reading us. I'm not going to take time to go to this internet site. I'll just tell you about it. But this is an example called Live Plasma, where you can enter in your favorite book, your favorite movie, your favorite music, book, movie. And immediately it generates what it thinks will be other movies, music, books that you think that you like. Amazon does this. If you buy books on Amazon, they say you might like this book. The text is reading you and writing a text for you. So how do we teach students to be aware of when texts are reading them? And I think this has some of the sociological, critical reading perspectives that Ileana was talking about. How might they be taught to write texts that read readers and assist them and provide information that may be useful to their readers? I won't go to these sites either in the interest of time, but another affordance is real-time data and automatic revision. Some texts continually update themselves based on incoming information. And I think I saw this one in your slide, Alana, the one with Twitter. If this map, the one in the upper left, if you would go to that website, it shows you in real time how many Twitter messages are being sent at every moment. in real time. The one on the lower right operates a little slower, but it, in real time, shows who is revising what text in Wikipedia. And it just sort of jumps around, and it's kind of interesting to watch where in the world people are editing Wikipedia articles and which articles they are revising. These are kind of interesting, too, because they're a visual representation of literacy, which I find very interesting. Another affordance is that texts are pliable but ephemeral. They can be easily manipulated and revised. We know that. I mean, that's the popularity of a word processor, which you see on the screen. We have all these tools. I can't imagine myself going back to writing on paper, which I did early on in my career, writing out drafts and crossing out. There's so many tools that can be used to shape and revise and extend digital text. And I contrast that with the monument a monument in Washington, D.C., where the opposite extreme is actually chiseling text in stone. And you know, we sometimes hear this argument that the internet is so changing, it's so pliable, it's not a firm medium like a book or paper, and therefore that makes it less reliable. Well, the next slide is kind of interesting, because someone went around the monuments in Washington, D.C. that were chiseled in stone and found many, many errors, including the ones here on one monument alone, the very important Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C. These are errors. So just because a technology allows something to be firm and unchangeable does not necessarily mean that it's more reliable. Of course, an obvious example of this affordance is the internet, that digital text can be encyclopedic. It's an extension of all of these texts being connected intertextually. It almost looks like a galaxy in space. It's a visual representation of the entire internet with just a little part of it pulled out as an example. The implications for instruction, I think, also are obvious. How do we help students navigate through this vast store of information and then synthesize the most reliable parts of that network? It also seems to be, this characteristic relates to another basic instinct. That is sort of the human instinct to gather all knowledge in one place. And to demonstrate that, you can think of the historic example, 300 BC, the library at Alexandria, Egypt, where the scholars tried to gather all the known knowledge into one place. Digital texts are easily disseminated, and they're participatory. Here's some data about only one blogging site. I can't read the numbers. It's 42 million blog sites, 500,000 posts, and 400,000 replies every day. And this is just one of the many blogging sites. We are invited, when we read articles now online, to comment on them. And there are discussions that emerge after reading some information on an article on the internet, for example. It is a great, seems to be a great opportunity for civic involvement, and that was some of the, that falls into the category of some of the questions that were posed previously. This relates also to some of the things that Jana talked about, that we have this basic instinct to use texts as tools of subversion. And I was told that a lot of you may not know the story of Martin. I was raised as a Lutheran, so I know this story. That's Martin Luther, the Reformation figure, who, when he defied the Catholicism at the time, posted 95 theses that on the church door, because the church door is where everybody went to read the latest information. So he was trying to subvert the dominant theology of his time by posting it on the door. Well, and we've already heard mentioned the Arab Spring is another example of we have this basic instincts of using text as tools of subversion. Another affordance I describe this way, it's that reading and writing in particular, in a digital world is four-dimensional. In conventional printed materials, the writing is two-dimensional. Your only decision is where on a page you're going to put the text in 2 dimensions. Well, of course, a computer screen also has 2 dimensions. However, you also have the sensation of depth. Things stack up in layers on the computer screen. But even more important is a decision that you have to make when you're writing digital text is when the text appears. That's a huge difference and changes the way we think about writing and reading, and also provides a way for us to limit sometimes in instructionally useful ways how students access certain information. Of course, the expanded social pragmatics are quite obvious in digital text. There are different ways to represent yourself to the world through writing in digital text. And how do we conform to or purposely violate social norms about text? And a lot of this isn't deep philosophical, sociological issues. Sometimes it's just as practical as if you get an email from a colleague that it says at the bottom, "Sent from my iPhone," you almost automatically, it's going to be a short email, right? Because it's too, some of the younger people are really good, but still, you know that it says, "Sent from my iPhone." That's a new social convention of writing, that we sort of make some assumptions about that. So there are all these social practices. And, here's a whole range of issues, and Robinson told me last night that you would be able to read some of these, so I don't have to read them all. Cyberbullying online, defriending people on Facebook. These add much broader social dimensions to our forms of reading and writing, made available by digital text online. What this is a way of integrating news reports that occurred over a long period of time, all related to the Arab Spring. Well, it's not displaying very well, but these tracks like roadways represent all of the countries in the Middle East that were involved in the Arab Spring. And then these dots represent a protest or government a response to a protest and an article about that. A political move is yellow. Red is a regime change that actually the political system changed. And the blue is an international external response. And these are all aligned on these tracks, so you can look at the country, you can look by the time period, you can click on one and see the original article. It's a dynamic text that has a lot of the elements, the affordances that I've been talking about. And I think how would we involve students in reading or creating texts that are like this? You can see it better on this screen. The countries are along the bottom which correspond to the tracks, and then you kind of move up to see, and you can see what's happening politically and the reporting about those events as you move up. A final point, all of these things together suggest to me that digital texts are inherently more engaging, or at least engaging in a different way than conventional printed text. So you have the visual representation on the top of the screen, the printed text. They require sort of a serious conformance to conventions with limited affordances. Digital texts, on the other hand, are more playful. We experiment. We have a little more fun with them. We can be creative. They don't have a single form that we must follow. And so they invite creative innovation because they have so many of these affordances. So even though, as you said, Alana, maybe motivation isn't the primary, it adds an important element to get us maybe to that critical thinking. Because you could maybe imagine using some of those texts displayed in that very engaging way, involving students in talking about political events and critically examining them. So, to review, and this is the end for today, the world is digital. Literacy outside of school is digital. Literacy inside of school is not so digital. So the affordances of printed and digital text differ greatly. So this is where we're going to start tomorrow. Okay? Thank you.
Profesor, tengo una gran preocupación. Siento que los niños en el día de hoy han estado olvidados. Hablando de los primeros contactos del niño con las letras, de los primeros contactos del niño con el libro, sigo creyendo y estoy convencida de que el libro digital no es más hiperactivo que la vida misma. El niño definitivamente se aboca o se enfrenta para acceder a la alfabetización, primero con una experiencia de vida, espontánea, ya sea un juego, una degustación de un alimento, etcétera. Luego vendría la expresión o la verbalización, luego la expresión gráfica, y ahí pienso que es donde intervendría la pantalla, el franelógrafo, el tablero, el cartel, qué sé yo, pero por encima está esa interactividad, esa expresión de la vida, porque al fin y al cabo el conocimiento del niño sí es un conocimiento binario a través de contrastes. Entonces, ¿cómo sería la alfabetización del volumen, de la textura? Hablemos del color y del tamaño, sí, ¿cierto? A través del texto digital, pero el volumen, la textura, no sé, definitivamente pienso que habría que revisar muchísimo la pedagogía de los primeros contactos del niño con el libro, del niño con las letras, a través de la alfabetización digital.
First of all, I'm not an early childhood person, but I'm not sure quite how I would answer that question. It seems that young children are more and more exposed to digital forms. I'm looking at you because at a very young age. And I'm not speaking here from the standpoint of research or scholarship. Let me speak from the standpoint of being a grandparent who has 3 grandchildren, one of whom has grown up with digital literacy. I used to have a picture in my slides labeled my favorite laptop. And it was a picture of me with my granddaughter on my lap, and we were reading a book. So I'm not saying that we should give up on that, and if the question is how do we connect digital literacy with sort of the emotional health and growth of children, I don't know. I don't see any opposition there necessarily, and I think maybe a good interactive experience online, maybe with an adult, could open up some exploration of those feelings and emotions and the kind of development that we think about with young children. But when I talk to people, when I see, they're at a very young age, they're sitting at a keyboard and interacting with text. And I don't know if that interferes in some way or with their emotional development. I hope not, as a grandparent. So I'm not sure I think it's a good question. And maybe but the best questions are the ones that I can answer. So let's try again.
¿Me regalas un segundo? ¿Te ponemos ¿la podemos hacer en español? Okay. Te vamos a colocar el micrófono para poderlo traducir.
Gracias.
A ti, gracias.
Sonido. Okay. I consider the question was related to, she said, here we have forgot kids, the small kids, because all the assumptions we had made so far have been made when students have the ability to decode text.
Oh, I see.
But
Okay.
she was asking about what about when kids are just approaching to the process of literacy or become literate.
In other words,
even when they don't decode. So she said, how can you teach shapes that is part of literacy? How can you teach them approach to the alphabet or things like that when they have not reached decoding processes? I consider that
so
was
I think I understand the question better. So my examples were more for people who are already able to read.
Yeah.
And the question is,
what about kids under preschool kids or kids that are just getting that ability to read and write? How can we make an approach to learn with digital texts?
I think one thing we need to consider is how do we lay a good foundation, even for children at a young age, to begin to be aware of some of the aspects of digital forms of communication. But I think maybe the question is how we might use this to teach the fundamental skills of literacy to young children. I think there are many innovative programs that have used the affordances of digital text to help children acquire alphabetic knowledge and fundamental reading skills. Programs that allow them to click on a word to hear it pronounced, so there's not an adult around that can help them decode a word that they're having difficulty with. So the affordances of digital text, I think, open up a lot of interesting possibilities for the earliest stages of reading instruction. So I think there are two aspects of that. How do we kind of lay the foundation for them to be aware of some of these issues that they will be facing as they become readers online? But also, how do we use the tools in a way that provide assistance to learning the basics of decoding?
En la exposición nos decía el profesor que fuera del aula es más digital y en el aula menos. Es tan cierto y me preocupa lo siguiente. Aquí hay un colegio en Bogotá que es de un holandés. Allá los estudiantes no tienen acceso a la computadora, no tienen acceso a nada de… Es más, no hay luz eléctrica, tiene que ser natural. Es peleado ese colegio para entrar a los estudiantes. Dan álgebra desde preescolar. Solamente entran en preescolar y no pueden entrar a segundo, en tercero, en cuarto, no. Solo entran en preescolar. Se los pelea la Universidad de los Andes y las grandes universidades pasan en la nacional. Y allá está mi nieto. Y yo me preguntaba, ¿y cómo hace? Y entonces él me decía, abue, porque ahora dicen abue, no dicen abuela. Entonces dice, abue, y nosotros vemos informática, no, pero no tienen computadores. Obvio que en la casa él juega con el papá y ya le está ganando al papá en todos los videojuegos, maneja la computadora, o sea, lo que dijo es cierto, fuera del aula está todo digital. Y si nosotros los profesores no nos tocamos y no ingresamos, y lo digo por mí, y no ingresamos inmediatamente, pues ellos ya se hacen bullying, se matan y nosotros no nos damos cuenta. Cuando el profesor ya se mete en el cuento y está leyendo lo que ellos están haciendo, hasta podemos prevenir una muerte. Eso es verdad.
If I understand it, there is a school that where that doesn't even have power, and how can you involve students with digital literacy in a school like that, even though and I think you're pointing out the contrast when your grandchild goes home and has access to all these digital tools, but in the school there is nothing. And I think that relates back to the important question that I posed is not just for an individual teacher, is this malpractice to completely ignore and avoid digital literacy in school, but that applies also to the school district, the government. You know, are we doing what we need to do for students in schools today if we deny them access to digital forms of reading and writing?
Mi pregunta es la siguiente. Mi nombre es Juan Carlos Coggia, de Maicao, La Guajira. ¿Qué desarrollo profesional necesitaremos nosotros los docentes para enfrentar exitosamente las nuevas tecnologías y alcanzar así que los estudiantes logren los objetivos propuestos teniendo en cuenta el uso de las nuevas tecnologías y la lectoescritura?
That question in part will be addressed tomorrow in the talk. Because tomorrow I'm going to report some more of the data from the survey that I shared earlier, but also some other investigations that we have done in schools, both of which give us some ideas about what might be the most effective and efficient way of helping teachers integrate digital literacy into their instruction, and what kind of preparation and experiences they might need that would be helpful. So if I don't answer your question tomorrow, ask it again. Okay?
Bueno, regalémosle un fuerte aplauso al profesor David Reinking, a Ilana Snyder y al profesor Octavio Henao también.